Hello, everyone. My name is Sam, and today I want to share a story with you about how I learned English. When I started learning English, it was very hard for me. I felt nervous because I didn't know many words, I couldn't speak fluently, and when I listened to other people speaking English, I didn't understand much. It made me feel frustrated, and sometimes I thought I could never learn. I tried different ways to learn English. I watched English movies, but I didn't understand most of what they were saying. I listened to English songs, but the words were too fast. I also studied grammar rules, but when I tried to speak, I couldn't remember the words or make correct sentences. It felt like nothing was working and I didn't know what to do. Then one day, I decided that I wanted to get better. I knew that if I worked hard, I could improve. I just needed to find a better way to learn. That's when I started looking for new methods and ideas to help me understand English more easily. I knew that I had to do something different if I wanted to see a change in my learning. At the beginning of my journey, I felt stuck and frustrated with learning English. No matter how much I tried, it always seemed difficult. I remember sitting down with my English books, feeling confused. I would try to memorize new words, but when it was time to speak or write, the words wouldn't come to my mind. I would forget them, or I would mix them up. It was very frustrating. I also struggled with listening. When I watched English movies or TV shows, the characters spoke too fast. I would only catch a few words here and there, and the rest sounded like noise. Even when I slowed down the video or turned on subtitles, I couldn't keep up. It felt like I was always 2 steps behind, trying to catch something I couldn't reach. This made me feel like maybe I wasn't good enough to learn English. I didn't give up, though. I tried many different methods. I listened to English songs, hoping the words would stick in my mind. But the music was too fast, and the words were hard to understand. I tried speaking English with my friends, but every time I got nervous and made mistakes. It seemed like my brain would freeze when it was my turn to talk. I also spent hours studying grammar. I read grammar books, took notes, and did exercises. But when I tried to use grammar in real conversations, I made many mistakes. The rules were confusing, and I found it hard to put them into practice. The more I tried, the more complicated it became. I would get lost in the rules and feel discouraged. After trying all these different ways, watching movies, listening to music, studying grammar, I still felt like I wasn't making progress. I couldn't understand native speakers, and my speaking skills weren't improving. I was starting to believe that learning English might be too hard for me. Every time I thought I was getting better, something would remind me of how far I still had to go. This made me feel stuck, like I wasn't moving forward. I knew I needed to improve, but I didn't know how. It was like being in a room with no door. I felt trapped in my frustration, and I didn't know what else to try. One day, while I was feeling particularly frustrated with my lack of progress, something unexpected happened. I met a friend named John, who was also learning English, but he seemed to be doing much better than me. His English was improving fast, and he spoke with more confidence. This made me curious, so I asked him, "John, how are you getting better so quickly? I've tried everything, but it's not working for me." John smiled and said, "Sam, you should try reading books in English." I was surprised by his answer. Reading? I had never really thought about it before. I always thought reading English books would be too difficult for me, especially since I was still struggling with basic words and sentences. The idea of reading a whole book in English felt like a big challenge. I told John, "But reading books in English sounds hard. What if I don't understand the words? Won't it just make me more confused?" John laughed and replied, "I thought the same thing when I started, but trust me, it helps. When you read, you see how words are used in sentences, and you learn grammar without even realizing it. Plus, it's not just about understanding every single word. It's about getting used to how English works. You'll pick up new words and ideas just by reading a little bit every day. Start with something simple. Don't worry if you don't understand everything right away." I still wasn't sure. It seemed like such a big step. How could reading help me when I couldn't even understand movies or conversations? But I was tired of feeling stuck, and I figured it couldn't hurt to try something new. So I asked John for advice on where to start. He recommended I begin with easy books, maybe children's stories or beginner-level novels. He even lent me one of his books, saying, "This one is perfect for beginners like you. Give it a try and don't rush. Just enjoy the process." That night, I sat down with the book John gave me. I opened the first page and stared at the words. At first, it felt strange and overwhelming. Some of the words were new to me, and I had to stop and look them up in a dictionary. But as I kept reading, something interesting happened. Even though I didn't know every word, I started to understand the story. The pictures in my mind became clearer, and I could follow what was happening. At first, it was slow. I had to read one sentence at a time and think about each word carefully. But after a while, I noticed I wasn't stopping as often. I could read a paragraph without looking up every word, and I understood the general idea of what I was reading. I realized that John was right. Even though I didn't understand everything perfectly, I was learning just by reading the sentences. I could see how words fit together, and I noticed patterns in the grammar. It wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. As I read more pages, I began to feel more comfortable with the language. The words I didn't know before started to become familiar, and I didn't have to check the dictionary as much. I could guess the meaning of some words just by looking at how they were used in the sentence. It felt like I was solving a puzzle, and every time I understood something new, it was exciting. At that moment, I realized that reading was going to help me in ways I never expected. Even though it was challenging at first, I could already see the benefits. It was like opening a new door to learning English, one that I had never tried before. I wasn't just learning words. I was learning how the language worked, how sentences were formed, and how ideas were expressed. So I decided to keep going. I told myself that I would read a little bit every day, no matter how difficult it felt. I trusted John's advice and started to believe that reading could be the key to improving my English. After my conversation with John, I made a commitment to incorporate reading into my daily routine. I began with the book he lent me, which was a simple children's story. It was colorful and engaging, filled with illustrations that helped me visualize the story. Each day I set aside time to read, even if it was just for a few minutes. I found a quiet corner in my house where I could focus without distractions. As I opened the book and turned to the first page, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The story was about a little rabbit who went on an adventure. The words were simple, but they told a delightful tale. I took my time, sounding out each word, and to my surprise, I started to understand the story without feeling overwhelmed. I would read one sentence at a time, and as I finished each page, I felt a sense of accomplishment. With each new chapter, I discovered that reading was more than just a fun activity. It was a powerful tool for learning. I began to notice new words that I hadn't seen before. Some words were familiar, while others were completely new. I kept a small notebook beside me to write down these new words along with their meanings. When I came across a word I didn't understand, I would pause and look it up. This not only helped me learn the word, but also helped me remember it better when I encountered it again. Reading simple English books was like having a conversation with the language. I could see how words were used in different contexts and how they fit together in sentences. This was incredibly helpful for my understanding of grammar. For example, I noticed how the author used verbs in the past tense to describe the rabbit's adventure. I started to understand the difference between past and present tense by seeing these patterns repeatedly in the text. It was like my brain was connecting the dots, and everything began to make sense. As I progressed to different books, I started reading short stories and beginner-level novels. Each new book brought new challenges and new words. Sometimes I would encounter phrases or expressions that confused me, but I learned not to be afraid of them. Instead of getting frustrated, I would try to guess their meaning from the context or look them up. The more I read, the more confident I became in understanding these expressions. One day, I picked up a book that contained simple dialogues between characters. As I read their conversations, I realized how natural English could sound. I could hear their voices in my mind, and I began to practice speaking out loud. I would read the lines aloud, mimicking the tone and rhythm of the dialogue. This practice helped me improve my pronunciation and intonation, and I felt more comfortable speaking English when I interacted with others. Reading also opened my eyes to different cultures and ideas. The stories I read were not only about language, but also about people, places, and experiences. I learned about different traditions and lifestyles through the characters in the books. This exposure made me more curious about the world and motivated me to learn even more. I wanted to know how to express my thoughts and feelings in English, just like the characters I read about. As the weeks went by, I started noticing significant changes in my English skills. I could understand conversations better, and I felt more confident speaking with my friends. I found that I could recall the new words I had learned from reading, and I was able to use them in my conversations. My vocabulary expanded, and I was no longer afraid of making mistakes when I spoke. Instead, I embraced the learning process, knowing that every mistake was a chance to improve. Not only did my vocabulary grow, but my writing skills also improved. I began to write short paragraphs in English, sharing my thoughts about the stories I read. I would summarize the plot or describe my favorite characters. Writing became a way for me to practice what I learned through reading. I found joy in expressing myself and discovering my voice in English. The more I read, the more I realized that I was not just learning a language. I was building a bridge to new opportunities. I felt empowered to communicate my ideas and connect with others. Reading opened my mind to new possibilities and encouraged me to engage with the world around me. It made learning English not just a task, but an adventure. I also shared my newfound love for reading with my friends. I would tell them about the books I was reading and encourage them to join me. I explained how reading could help them improve their English, just as it helped me. Soon, a few of my friends decided to start reading as well, and we began to discuss the stories together. We formed a little book club where we would share our thoughts and encourage each other to read more. Reflecting on my journey, I realized that reading was the key that unlocked the door to my understanding of English. It helped me overcome my struggles and transformed my learning experience. I went from feeling stuck and frustrated to feeling empowered and confident. I learned that reading is not just about words on a page. It is a powerful tool that can open up a whole new world of language, culture, and communication. With each book I read, I grew more excited about the journey ahead. I knew that there was still much to learn, but I felt ready to face the challenges. Reading had shown me the path to success, and I was determined to continue on this wonderful adventure of learning English. As the months passed, I could feel a significant shift in my confidence with the English language. What had once felt like a daunting mountain to climb now seemed like an exciting journey full of possibilities. Every book I finished was a victory, and with each page turned, I could sense my progress. Reading became not just a task, but a source of joy and inspiration. I remember the first time I completed an entire novel. It was a simple story about friendship and adventure, and I couldn't believe I had read a whole book in English without giving up. When I reached the last page, I felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. I closed the book and smiled, knowing that I had achieved something significant. I shared my excitement with John, who was equally thrilled. He reminded me that every step, no matter how small, was important in my learning journey. With newfound enthusiasm, I dove into more challenging books. I began exploring different genres, from mystery to fantasy. Each genre introduced me to a different style of writing, new vocabulary, and fresh ideas. I was no longer intimidated by the words on the page. Instead, I embraced them. I would often stop to highlight interesting phrases or sentences that struck me, eager to understand how the authors crafted their stories. As my reading progressed, I noticed my speaking skills began to improve as well. I found myself using new vocabulary in conversations with friends and family. I was no longer afraid to express my thoughts in English, even if I made mistakes. I learned to embrace these errors as part of the process. My confidence grew as I saw how my friends responded positively to my efforts. They appreciated my willingness to communicate, and that encouragement pushed me to keep practicing. One afternoon, I attended a gathering with friends, and I found myself engaged in a conversation entirely in English. At first, I felt nervous, but as I shared my thoughts, I realized that I was able to articulate my ideas more clearly. I could hear the words flowing from my mouth without hesitation, and I felt a rush of excitement. The laughter and smiles from my friends fueled my confidence even further. Writing, too, became an essential part of my progress. Inspired by the books I read, I began to keep a journal in English. Every day, I would write a few sentences about my day, my feelings, or even reflections on the stories I had read. This practice allowed me to experiment with the language. I tried different sentence structures and vocabulary, eager to find my unique voice. Over time, my writing became more fluid, and I started to express complex thoughts in a simple yet effective manner. One day, I decided to share some of my journal entries with John. I was nervous, wondering if he would think they were good enough. However, he read them with genuine interest and offered constructive feedback. He praised my progress and encouraged me to keep writing. His support motivated me to continue pushing myself. I also began to write short stories inspired by the books I had read, weaving together my thoughts and creativity in English. As I continued reading and writing, I began to notice a significant improvement in my grammar as well. The patterns I observed in the stories I read began to reflect in my own writing. I became more aware of how sentences were constructed, how punctuation affected meaning, and how different tenses shaped the flow of a story. It was as if reading had provided me with a blueprint for the language, helping me navigate through the complexities of English. With this newfound confidence, I decided to take a bold step and participate in a local English speaking club. The idea initially intimidated me. I worried that my speaking skills wouldn't be good enough, but I was eager to challenge myself. When I walked into the room for the first time, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, and I was soon introduced to other learners, each on their own journey to master English. During our meetings, we would engage in discussions on various topics, from current events to personal experiences. I was surprised at how much I had to contribute. The conversations flowed naturally, and I found myself speaking with confidence. My fellow club members encouraged each other, creating an environment where it was okay to make mistakes. This supportive atmosphere made me feel at ease, allowing me to express myself without fear. The more I spoke, the more I realized that I could think in English. It was a transformative moment for me. Instead of translating my thoughts from my native language, I began to form sentences directly in English. This breakthrough made my conversations feel more natural and effortless. I could respond to questions and share my opinions without pausing to translate, which boosted my confidence even further. As I reflected on my journey, I realized how far I had come. The frustration and doubt that once plagued me had been replaced with a sense of empowerment. I had turned my struggles into stepping stones, and my love for reading had become the foundation of my learning. I was no longer just a passive learner. I was an active participant in my education. My friends noticed the change in me too. They often commented on how much my English had improved and how confident I had become. Their encouragement motivated me to keep pushing forward. I also started helping others who were struggling with English, sharing my experiences and tips on how reading could enhance their learning. It felt rewarding to give back and support others on their own journeys. In one of our English club meetings, we organized a small presentation where each member would share their favorite book and explain why they loved it. I was excited to present, but I also felt nervous. However, I prepared thoroughly, practicing my speech multiple times. When it was my turn, I stood in front of the group, took a deep breath, and shared my thoughts about a book that had inspired me. I spoke about the characters, the lessons learned, and how it had impacted my learning journey. To my delight, the feedback was positive, and many members shared their own stories of progress, creating a beautiful exchange of experiences. Looking back, I understood that my journey with English was just beginning. I was eager to continue reading, writing, and speaking. Each step I took opened up new opportunities, and I was excited to explore what lay ahead. Reading had not only improved my language skills, but had also changed the way I viewed learning itself. I had discovered the joy of exploring new worlds through books, and I was ready to embrace every challenge that came my way. With a heart full of gratitude for the friends and mentors who supported me, I knew I would never stop learning. I would continue to seek knowledge, explore new ideas, and share my journey with others. The power of reading had transformed my understanding of English, and I was determined to use it to connect with the world around me. As I progressed on my journey to learn English, I began to realize the importance of connecting with my community. While my reading, writing, and speaking skills were improving, I felt a deep desire to engage with the world beyond books and classes. I wanted to apply what I had learned in real-life situations, so I started looking for opportunities to interact with others who shared similar interests. One day, I learned about a local community center that offered language exchange programs. These events brought together people from various backgrounds, all eager to practice their language skills. Intrigued, I decided to attend one of these sessions. I arrived at the center feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Would I be able to communicate effectively? Would others be as welcoming as I hoped? As I entered the room, I was greeted by friendly faces and warm smiles. The atmosphere was buzzing with conversations in different languages. I took a deep breath and introduced myself to a few participants. They were enthusiastic about sharing their stories and experiences, which helped ease my initial anxiety. During the language exchange, I was paired with a native English speaker named Sarah. She was patient and encouraging, guiding me through conversations while allowing me to express myself freely. We talked about our favorite hobbies, travel experiences, and cultural differences. I was amazed at how quickly the conversation flowed. Each time I struggled with a word or phrase, Sarah gently corrected me and suggested alternatives, turning every mistake into a learning moment. As the weeks went by, I became a regular attendee at the community center. I looked forward to these sessions, not only for the language practice, but also for the connections I was forming. I met people from various backgrounds, each bringing their unique perspectives and stories. I learned about their cultures, traditions, and the challenges they faced while learning a new language. One evening, I decided to organize a small potluck dinner for the language exchange group. I thought it would be a wonderful way to bring everyone together, share delicious food, and practice our language skills in a relaxed setting. I reached out to Sarah and a few other participants, and they were excited about the idea. We worked together to plan the menu, deciding to each bring a dish that represented our culture. On the day of the potluck, my heart raced with anticipation. As friends arrived with their dishes, the room filled with delightful aromas and laughter. I introduced everyone, making sure to encourage conversations between those who spoke different languages. It was a joyful sight to see people mingling, sharing stories, and exchanging recipes. When it was time to eat, we gathered around the table, and I took a moment to express my gratitude for the connections we had built. I shared how much the group had meant to me in my journey to learn English and how it had inspired me to step outside my comfort zone. Everyone nodded in agreement, and as we shared our meals, I felt a deep sense of belonging. As the evening progressed, I noticed how much my confidence had grown. I engaged in conversations with ease, exploring different topics and asking questions. I could hear the excitement in my voice as I spoke about my experiences and listened to others. The laughter and camaraderie in the room reinforced the idea that language was not just a skill to master, but a bridge to connect with others. Through this experience, I understood that learning English was not solely about grammar and vocabulary. It was about forming connections, sharing stories, and celebrating our differences. I left the potluck that night with a heart full of joy and a renewed commitment to my language journey. I realized that I was no longer just a student. I was a part of a vibrant community that inspired me to keep pushing forward. This journey had transformed my life, and I was eager to continue building relationships, exploring new cultures, and embracing every opportunity to learn. The world around me was full of possibilities, and I was ready to take on each new challenge, armed with the language skills I had gained and the friendships I had forged along the way. As I reflected on my journey of learning English, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The struggles I had faced, the challenges I had overcome, and the friendships I had built all contributed to my growth as a language learner. I realized that the power of reading had been the key to unlocking my potential and transforming my relationship with the English language. One day, I decided to share my story with my classmates at the community center. I wanted to inspire others who were struggling just as I once had. I invited everyone to a small gathering where we could talk openly about our experiences and the role reading had played in our journeys. I hoped that by sharing my success, I could encourage others to embrace reading as a powerful tool for learning English. When the day arrived, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. I arranged chairs in a circle, creating a cozy atmosphere where everyone could feel comfortable sharing. As people trickled in, I greeted them warmly and offered snacks and drinks. The room buzzed with conversations, and I could feel the energy of support and encouragement. Once everyone was settled, I took a deep breath and began to share my story. I spoke about the challenges I had faced in learning English, the frustration, the confusion, and the moments of doubt. I recounted my first encounter with reading in English and how hesitant I had been at first. But as I continued to read, I discovered a new world filled with exciting stories and valuable lessons. I shared the joy I felt after finishing my first novel, the friendships I had formed through language exchange, and the sense of belonging I had found within our community. I emphasized how reading had not only improved my vocabulary and grammar, but had also given me the confidence to express myself in English. I could see nods of recognition and encouragement from my classmates as I spoke. After sharing my journey, I encouraged everyone to pick up a book and start reading. I emphasized that reading could be enjoyable and rewarding, regardless of their current language level. I suggested starting with simple books, like children's stories or graphic novels, which could spark interest and build confidence. I urged them to explore different genres, find topics they loved, and embrace the process of learning. I also encouraged my classmates to join the local library, where they could find a wealth of resources and participate in reading programs. I shared my experiences of borrowing books and discovering new authors who inspired me. The library, I explained, was a treasure trove of knowledge waiting to be explored. As I concluded my talk, I invited everyone to share their own experiences with reading or their favorite books. One by one, classmates began to share their stories, and I was amazed at the diversity of experiences in the room. Some spoke about the thrill of reading a novel in their native language and then finding the English version to compare. Others shared how reading had opened their minds to new cultures and ideas. The atmosphere was electric as we exchanged thoughts and recommendations. I felt a sense of unity and support among us, all striving to improve our English together. This moment reminded me of the importance of community in our learning journeys. We were not alone in our struggles. We were in this together. In that gathering, I witnessed the spark of motivation ignite in my classmates. Many expressed their desire to start reading more, to dive into new stories, and to use reading as a way to strengthen their language skills. I encourage them to set small goals like reading a chapter a day or discussing a book with a friend. Every little step mattered, and each page turned was a step closer to fluency. As we wrapped up the gathering, I left with a heart full of hope and inspiration. It was incredible to see how sharing my story had motivated others to embrace reading in their language learning. I realized that my journey with English was not just about my personal success, but also about empowering others to find their paths. In my final message, I reminded everyone that reading is one of the best ways to learn a new language. It opens doors to new worlds, enriches our vocabulary, and enhances our understanding of different cultures. Reading is not just a task. It is an adventure that can bring joy and excitement to our learning journeys. As I walked home that evening, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. I had transformed my struggles into successes, not only for myself, but for others as well. I was determined to continue my journey, to keep reading, writing, and sharing my love for English with everyone I met. In closing, I thought about how reading had changed my life, and I hoped that my classmates would discover the same joy and empowerment through their reading journeys. Together, we could create a community of learners who supported each other, celebrated our progress, and embraced the beauty of language learning. I looked forward to witnessing the growth and success of each individual in our group, knowing that we were all capable of achieving greatness through the power of reading.